Hello, I'm Richard Hooper and this is SatTV Week. Now I'm pleased to be joined by Nigel Towers of Thales Alenia Space UK. Nigel, advent of small satellites.
Yes.
How is that going to affect the business and supply chain?
Well, I think that the main thing is with moving to the constellation of small satellites, it means that the reliability is achieved at the constellation level rather than individual satellite level. And that means the satellites can be slightly lower reliable on an individual basis. That opens the door to using more COTS equipment rather than traditional, very high cost, radiation hardened, high reliability parts. And so it opens the doors for COTS equipment, which in turn opens the doors to non-traditional space suppliers to provide equipment into the small satellites.
But small satellites can't do everything the bigger buses can do. But there seems to be a lot of investment in these smaller, larger constellations.
Yeah.
Where's this going? What is it? Is this going to be the demise of the big bus?
I think in some ways it could well be, yes. I think with the so-called mega constellations, then you are be able to provide as good, if not better, service than the larger buses. The added advantage is the fact that because it's smaller satellites, you have in multiple launches, the launch cost is no longer necessarily the driving factor. So you can start replenishing your constellation. So instead of launching a large satellite and you're stuck with that capability for 15 years, you now have a constellation of satellites which you can replenish on 2 or 3 year cycle. So you're constantly upgrading the technology, upgrading the service, upgrading the performance.
Now you're innovating in this area because you've got a product called SkimSat.
Yes.
What's so special about that?
SkimSat is very low Earth orbit. So now we're talking about 160, 200 kilometers, so much lower than traditional low Earth orbit satellites. So you're right on the edge of the atmosphere. The huge advantage there is the fact that because you've come down in the altitude, all the sensors are correspondingly smaller to give you the same performance. So if you're talking about electro-optical sensors, so cameras or radars, you need a much smaller detector to achieve the same performance you'd achieve with a large satellite at the higher level.
Now, I've just listened to your talking there, and you're talking about the new growth phase for Thales Alenia Space UK, and you're talking, a big part of that is R&D and innovation.
Yeah.
How's that going to work? You've got a lot of competition out there. How are you going to focus?
Well, I mean, one of the reasons for being at this event is to try and broaden the net for the various suppliers around the UK, for the small, innovative companies, the SMEs, links to academia, etc., because that's where we see the new ideas coming from, and that's how we're going to achieve our growth. We don't expect to be a fully vertically integrated company. We want to rely on these niche capabilities from these SMEs and align them to achieve our growth.
And in terms of, you mentioned competition,
Yeah.
and Airbus.
Yeah.
You're not just trying to compete with them, you're trying to establish a very large
Yes.
market.
Yeah, the idea is we aim to become a satellite or system prime, so we will be competing with Airbus, but our philosophy is not to just try and take half of the UK business from Airbus. That's not what we want to do. We want to actually grow the full space sector in the UK, and that's why we're aligning with the SMEs. And the idea is to align technology roadmaps, align development cycles with these smaller companies, so we all grow together, rather than being vertically integrated.
Now, again, we've heard about small sats, we've heard about R&D. The space sector is changing rapidly, and the UK has a very large space sector.
Yeah.
Where do you actually see this going in the next few years?
Well, I think with the advent of these mega constellations, I think you're seeing more and more properly commercial business-based propositions with a satellite segment. So we've got the likes of OneWeb, LeoSat, O3b, who are very much driven by the consumer use of broadband via satellite and things like that. So we're seeing this sort of explosion in mega constellations, and I think that's going to be the way of the future. And as you said before, it could well see the reduction in the reliance on these huge geostationary satellites.
And finally, where do you see Thales Alenia Space UK? You're in a big growth phase now.
Yeah.
What are you really trying to aim for?
I think we are in an aggressive growth phase, and that's thanks to a lot of inward investment from Thales Alenia Space as a group into the UK, and we are getting support from the government and from the UK Space Agency to grow in the UK. I'd see us as a prime contractor for these large constellations, and in particular having adaptive and agile payload and systems. So if you have a large constellation, a lot of the infrastructure cost is involved with actually managing those constellations. So it's all about the ground segment. Now, if you've got a large constellation, you can then insert satellites with different payloads. So you might have a telecoms constellation, but then you put in Earth observation satellites. They're all managed by the same ground control station, by the same management system, so you don't have any extra costs on there. But you're able to provide then services in the observation or weather monitoring or pollution monitoring at an incremental cost instead of having to have a dedicated constellation. So one of our growth points is to have these agile payloads which will fit into telecom constellations but provide alternative services.
Nigel, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.